and finding opportunities. I think I've always kind of been one to kind of look for opportunities others might miss. And I've always been kind of contrarian in nature and trying to always think different, like from the crowd. Is if you can find good investment opportunities and even small investments over time can become big investments over time. I mean, the only thing certain is uncertainty in this world. Don't let your growth be stagnant in regards to what you can learn and know, because specialized knowledge is really a competitive advantage.
Hi, everyone. This is Jack Alwell with another money episode. Today, we have very special guest, Martin Canchola with TerraFlow Capital, land flipping buddy. Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jack. I am very happy to be here.
So, before we get into some of Robert Kiyosaki's books, some land flipping, gold, silver, and Bitcoin, and maybe how AI can help us make some more money, I do like to start the conversation out by asking every guest, what was your relationship like with money growing up?
Yeah, so I love that question because I definitely had a very interesting relationship with money growing up, and really since a young kid. And my mom always tells this story, but we used to live back in Valley Center in California, a very rural area, and probably that's probably where I fell in love with land, right? Because we had a creek in the backyard, we had a little mini farm with goats, peacocks, I mean chickens, turkeys, I mean pheasants. I mean I can go on and on. Six German shepherds, like it was crazy, and that was like my love for nature, my love for the land, and really just and also building my relationship with money, of course. And so we used to go to Mexico for like little family trips for the weekend. And so what I would do out there was I would probably like sixth grade, I'd go out there to Mexico. I'd buy, with my money I saved, I'd go buy, Mexican candy and then bring it back to my school. And I'd be, selling candy to the kids on the bus. And of course, one day I got in trouble for that. So I wasn't allowed to do that anymore. But I think from an early age, I was kind of always thinking of way, okay, well, how can I make some money? And for some reason it was a little bit of an obsession of mine, and just thinking about, I guess, how money works as well too. I've always been curious about that. I would always ask questions, but I think that was like a big part of it. And then just kind of continuing on my journey, and just like the first job I ever got was like 13, working at a Wendy's in Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa, for the summer when I was visiting my dad and my stepmom out there. And out there, you could be pretty young and work. And so I couldn't really work the grill, so I could only toast buns and serve drinks. But again, like, and that was when I saved up for my Dreamcast when that came out. So I was playing that all summer, and that was definitely probably the highlight of my time, back then with the Sega Dreamcast. And then just keeping on grinding, right? I've always been grinding, just kind of okay, thinking of ways and finding opportunities. I think I've always kind of been one to kind of look for opportunities others might miss. And I've always been kind of contrarian in nature and trying to always think different, like from the crowd. Like I never like following the herd. I always like trying to do the exact opposite, or be there before the herd comes is ideal.
Mhm. Yeah, I didn't know. In addition to liking asset discussions, you and I also have in common something special that we both got reprimanded for selling candy in school, I guess, because I used to sell Sour Patch watermelon in bulk out of my backpack, and
Hmm.
I also got in trouble at school. Interesting. Your parents, did they involve you much in money discussions growing up?
Not, I wouldn't say too heavily. I mean, I wouldn't even say like, mom and dad, like they had like the best financial education. I mean, they were just kind of doing what they could. You know, my parents, they were divorced, so my mom, being single and always had to work, and either we were with family or a babysitter. So she was always, grinding, always working, different jobs in retail, got into law enforcement. Actually, and I was growing up in a pretty strict household, considering my stepdad at the time was a cop, and he's still a cop today, very like top cop, great guy, and my mom was a corrections officer, right, working in juvenile hall, right. So of course, they don't want their kid growing up in the streets or doing things like that, and so it was relatively strict in my household. So I'd say like at least in that way they did their best to raise me good and kind of think, try to stay out of trouble. Of course, it was funny because, of course, I call it the opposite effect. Like when you tell your kid to do something, it's like they almost like. So the funny thing was, they were, basically cops and corrections officer, and of course, what was I obsessed with as a kid? Gangster rap and hip hop, Tupac, Biggie. So I remember, my CDs, I would have to like, I when I could get to CDs when I could get them, and they didn't care if a parent was with me or not. And that was like almost like having paraphernalia in the house, right? Having those CDs, the Tupacs and the Biggies, and I'd always get in trouble for listening to that stuff. But yeah, it was just always interesting, just and I do the same thing with my kids. I think the same thing. Okay, if I tell her to do this thing, she's probably just going to do the exact opposite. So I kind of had a little bit of a different parenting, kind of growing more of like a free range parent, I guess. And it turned out okay. My daughter's actually turning 18 soon, and yeah, she lives with me full time. But I think we learn from our parents on what to do and like what's the good, what's the bad from them. And then we try to do better for our kids and stuff like that. But I think my relationship with money, I was able to kind of step it up a little bit compared to where they came from. Just kind of working with the
Mhm.
government jobs, and even today it's like a lot of the retirements depended on the pensions and all the stuff that they kind of paid into. Whereas me being more of an entrepreneur, that's really kind of all on me. I gotta figure out. I gotta plan for my retirement. I gotta tuck away and save. And I never really wanted to depend on any kind of government or anything in that matter to my financial future.
Mhm. So one of the cool things about growing up is you get to pick who you listen to more. And one of the people you've chosen to listen to a lot and read a lot is Robert Kiyosaki. For the listeners, I guess, that don't know who Robert Kiyosaki is, can you give a quick characterization of who he is and how you discovered him?
Yeah, so I believe my mom gave me the Robert Kiyosaki book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, and that was kind of like my first journey into like reading more about finance. And then from there, I was really going down the rabbit hole. I started going through a lot of his real estate books, the cash flow quadrant. I'm really getting into the mindset of like thinking of those four quadrants. Like you could be an employee, right, where you work for money, you use your time. Then you have the kind of like the self-employed, where you just pretty much create another job for yourself. And then you have like I forget there's like four of them, but then you move finally into like the investor quadrant where your
Mhm.
assets are creating enough revenue to kind of keep basic needs met and then some. And so it was always that framework that I kind of like took under my belt pretty early on, and just trying to think about that and figure out, okay, well, how can I stack assets over time, even when you're not making that much money. Back then I was not making a lot of money. It was very basic income. But I think one thing I learned even back then is if you can find good investment opportunities, and even small investments over time can become big investments over time. And that was, I learned, I keep that quote close. And that was from The Millionaire Mind by Dr. Thomas Stanley, which is another pivotal book in my life that I still go back to over and over and kind of listen to the audiobook. But it really, a great way to think of a millionaire mindset. And people think of millionaires and they think of like, flashy cars, big houses, but a lot of times they're just kind of deep in debt. And if you were to if they didn't have their job or their income, how long could they actually sustain their life? Probably not that long. Whereas when you think about the Millionaire Mind and some of the Robert Kiyosaki books, if being in a position where if I wasn't able to work or I got hurt, that I could still maintain my lifestyle for like the next 10, 20 years or beyond, kind of thing. And that's how I look at true wealth is being able to, how much time can you have if you don't make any more money as of right now.
Mhm. So if someone hadn't read any Kiyosaki, which book would you direct them to first?
The last book that I ever read from Robert Kiyosaki in the series was called Mike Maloney's Guide to Investing in Gold and Silver, and that was probably one I wish I would have read first in the beginning. Of course, with today with gold at all-time highs, silver at all-time highs, I never thought I'd see silver above $50, and I knew once it wrangled past that the game was on. So ideally, if I would have read that a little earlier, I probably would have stuck a little bit more silver. But I think that was definitely one that I wish I would have gotten on a little bit earlier. The Cash Flow Quadrant, I would say that could be a good first or second book of Robert Kiyosaki just to kind of understand the framework. And then, of course, he has the Rich Dad Poor Dad, which is great for your kids. It's very easy to read. It doesn't matter if you're an adult or a kid. That's really just like go-to reading for like your level one type of finance, just to understand some of the basics. But if you want to go next level, I do like The Millionaire Mind by Dr. Thomas Stanley. It is one of my all-time favorites, finance books.
Awesome. No, I started out at cash flow quadrant. I mean, it's very vivid in my mind. I remember being outside at a pool reading that book and like, oh, this is what they're doing. Like, this is how the wealthy are, just acquiring assets and borrowing against them and not paying so much in taxes. So I did have a question on X um, to people telling them I had a Kiyosaki fan coming on, and well, what should I ask him? And there was one question from Andy Shields, and he brought up he uses fear mongering to influence his followers. It's been successful for him. But does training your brain to make decisions out of fear the best way forward long term? What long term implications are there with this decision making process theme? I thought that was an interesting question. I kind of because I kind of agreed with them on a little bit of the essence, but I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts.
No, I see where he's coming from in regards to kind of selling based on fear. I'm trying to think, like, I know Robert Kiyosaki, I mean, he does talk about, certain crashes coming. And I remember him, I don't know if he was like an official Bitcoin believer, like in the beginning. I think he might have been a little skeptical. Like a lot of people are skeptical of Bitcoin, even I
Hmm.
was in the beginning. But I think over time you kind of convert the more you understand it. Like even Grant Cardone is a great example of somebody who's like
Hmm.
all into real estate and was skeptical of Bitcoin. And then once it clicked, he's now making a hybrid agency to, buy real estate and a hybrid of acquiring Bitcoin at the same time, doing that. So I think in regards to like Robert and him spreading fear, I think it's very normal in the people who push gold and silver or like say like the next collapse is coming. Um, I mean, it's something happens every 10 years or so. Like regardless of you can fear monger all you want, but I think being prepared, you don't want to make decisions based on fear. I know that. You want to make decisions based in a place of just like a better understanding of, you understanding like when I invest in Bitcoin, I know I know the reason why. Same thing with like gold and silver. I'm doing it to really protect my assets and really maintain my purchasing power over time. Um, I mean, the only thing certain is uncertainty in this world. I mean, we can just see it right now. I mean, with all the civil unrest and things happening, with politics and potentials of like war and all the Greenland. I mean, it's just like it's just nonstop. Even with like every there's so much civil unrest right now, and even the AI generated content isn't helping all that too, right? Because AI generated content. There's a great movie called Mountainhead. Um, and it talks and it's kind of like showcasing like the world falling apart and if the billionaires were all to get together because of like AI generated content and we're seeing that kind of take place right now. So there's a lot of fear out there in the market. And I think what helps me kind of control that fear is being in a position where when you have a certain amount of say, like I tell my daughter this too, when you go to get a job, right, your first job in the market, if you have $0 in the bank, you're going to take any job that you can get for whatever amount you're going to get. And that's just it. Whereas I tell my daughter, if you have 10 grand in the bank before you go and try to get your job, you're going to go in there a little bit more confidently and you're not going to go in there on fear because you have that little nest egg, you have a cushion, you know how to play the game a little bit. And I think that's it. I think if you kind of prepare yourself, you prepare your finances, you prepare your mental state, you prepare your health, and you stay focused on just you know being a good human, and you don't make decisions based on fear. I think that's really the most important thing. And of course these guys got to push it. They're selling books and doing all that stuff, which is understandable. But yeah, I'm not about the fear mongering. But I think there is things that you need to be aware of on how the world works, economics, and how certain everything's connected, right? If something happens, you know, in Venezuela or we take over, then there's something's going to happen. Everything's connected, even with the tariffs, blah blah blah. So I think of it like a Buddhist kind of mindset. Everything in the world's connected. So if you do something over here, it might affect something over here, and you just got to kind of understand how that works to kind of play the game.
Awesome. So was Kiyosaki what led you into gold and silver initially, or
So,
did you?
well, yeah. So initially, after I read Mike Maloney's book on the Rich Dad series, Investing in Gold and Silver, I bought my first ounce of silver back in 2020s, and I think my first ounce I bought was $40 an ounce, and that was when it was
Wow.
running up to $50. It was when it had that last run up to $50, and then it collapsed. So really, and then from there, I bought a little bit of silver during that time, like one or two, a handful of ounces at a time, because again, I wasn't making that much. But then it crashed for like a good 5+ years, sub 12 $13. Like those were some good days, buying silver. But even if it was 12 or $13, the silver shops were charging $5 7 over spot, because the paper price of silver was different than the physical price of silver. um, and which I'm sure a lot of your listeners kind of know, about how they, every 1 ounce of real physical, there's like a certain amount of paper ounces. So that kind of, messes with the price a little bit. But yeah, just getting physical, like right now is like crazy, right? You know, I heard Tiffany's going to be raising their prices on silver, and it's just like APMEX, where I used to buy my gold and silver. You could buy like $200 worth, get free shipping. Now their standard order is $10,000 or more.
Wow. Okay.
Right. And I saw some other coin shops where they're still doing the same thing, but like APMEX is like a major player, and for them to say your minimum order is only 10,000, like something's happening, and it's and
Hmm.
that's why we see the price of silver going to like three digit probably by the end of the month.
Hmm. And so once you got into gold and silver, is that kind of the gateway drug to Bitcoin?
Yeah, yeah, it was actually because I saw Bitcoin. I knew it was happening, but I was super skeptical of it. I didn't really trust it. Plus, you couldn't even really buy it. I mean, that was when the only exchange was Mt. Gox. But I think understanding precious metals and having a little understanding on how software kind of works, I saw the Bitcoin story over time, and I think what triggered me to finally make the jump into Bitcoin was when Bitcoin went hyperbolic. It went to about $1,000, $1,200, I think, per Bitcoin, and then the Mount Gox hack happened, right? A whole bunch of Bitcoin was stolen from Mount Gox, and that was like the death nail in Bitcoin's coffin, supposedly. But what I saw happen was not Bitcoin, the protocol didn't fail. The protocol itself was working 100% as it should. It was the exchange that failed. Um, and I realized that at that moment. So then when the price collapsed to around, sub 200, $300, that's when, the little bit of money I was making back then, I was able to scramble and get, a little bit into there and just dollar cost average during that time. And again, I was just dollar cost averaging. And that's where a good example of a small investment over time could become a big investment over time if you can recognize these opportunities. And like something like that could change your life, if you're willing to kind of hold. And holding Bitcoin from then to where we're at today, I mean, it's night and day, right? Back then you were like, if you had Bitcoin, you were like a drug dealer, you were a terrorist, you were laundering money, you were on Silk Road. But now it's like, okay, today we're like ETFs, US Bitcoin Reserve, companies buying Bitcoin. Like even El Salvador every day buys one Bitcoin with printed money. So we're in a total different stage of the game. And now I see, gold's already what 20, $30 trillion market, and I see Bitcoin, Bitcoin's going to be 10 trillion plus, probably by, it's going to move pretty quick, and it'll be on par probably with gold. But I think it's good to hold both the physical and digital, because you never know what kind of scenario you're going to be in. We don't know if another country is going to come over here and we got to bail somewhere else, or we got to go somewhere else. Try hauling about around a bunch of silver. It's not easy.
For people that wanted to learn more about Bitcoin, do you have any recommendations for early resources, whether it be podcasts,
Mhm.
books, magazines, whatever?
Yeah, there's probably two books. The first book I would recommend is The Bitcoin Standard. I forget how you say the name of the author, but if you just put The Bitcoin Standard, the book will pop up. And that's like similar to Mike Maloney's book to investing in gold and silver, but this one goes through the history of money, kind of like when we're using big stones and shells for money, and then how we moved into like the dollar, and then it gets into Bitcoin. It breaks it down in an economic viewpoint, very easy to read and understand. You don't have to be super technical. So the Bitcoin Standard is a good one to go to, just like in general. But if you're a little bit more technical and want to go under the hood of Bitcoin, there's probably my favorite book. It's called The Book of Satoshi. And the whole book technically is written by Satoshi Nakamoto. And it was all somebody put together all the emails, all the forums, all the threads that Satoshi ever talked about publicly, and they put it into a book. And so it has people asking them, okay, well, Bitcoin were to do this, could it fail? And then Satoshi is giving real raw feedback on like the whole idea of it. So it's almost like, it's almost like the protocol little, if Satoshi in Satoshi's own words. And so it gets a little bit more technical under there on how he solved the double spend problem, why he picked 21 million coins, and it goes into detail there. So if you only read two books, those would be the ones I would recommend.
Awesome.
Oh, and there is
So I know
one
you.
more. There is
Mhm.
one more. Sorry, Digital Gold, and that's talking
Okay.
about the misfits of Bitcoin and kind of like the story of Mt. Gox and a few of the other players. Um, even like the story, like the guy that makes Silk Road, what was his name?
I forget.
Ross Ross Ulbricht. Ross Ulbricht was the one who
Okay.
got locked up, and then Trump pardoned him, right? He was locked up for his whole rest of his life for creating the Silk Road, right? And and yeah, so he's out. I mean, so that was pretty big when that happened. But yeah, man, but the Bitcoin journey is wild, and I think now it's just never been more publicly like everyone loves Bitcoin now.
So you had mentioned growing up rural California. That might have been what sparked your interest in land. Can you give us a little bit how you did transition into land?
Yeah, so I started an agency. So my main bread and butter is apartment SEO. .com, and we do multifamily real estate. We do internet marketing for apartments. We're specializing in search engine optimization, reputation, social media, websites. So I built a pretty successful agency with me and my business partner Ron Ruiz. We're going to be 13 years, later in a couple months. 13 years in business, and we've made a pretty good mark for ourselves. So of course, when you start a business, it's successful, you're able to tuck a little bit of extra, money away. So, and then one of my dreams was to always own a big piece of land, right? So I was scouring the web looking for my little piece of paradise, and I came across Kern County because I was living in downtown Long Beach, and I wanted to be like a couple hours drive to go find. I wanted to find the biggest lot in the mountains I could find for the money that I had saved. And so the first deal that I bought was 20 acres in Caliente in Kern County in a small rural city called Twin Oaks, California. A beautiful little rural mountain town. All they have is like one little general store and a church and a bunch of ranches. And man, it is just serene. I mean, the whole world could be falling apart and you would not even know because it is just, you know, barely untouched by man, not a lot of buildings, just pure rural bliss. And when the super blooms go, it's just amazing. And so that 20 acres raw agricultural land, zone ag, with a shared well on it. I got for a pretty good deal. I put 50% down, and then I owner financed the other half for 5 years. And then, I paid that off, over that time. And then actually the lot across, became available, ended up getting that one. And then just little over time, I just found ways to just save up and I just kept land banking. So instead of me saving the cash, I was buying land and I was called land banking is what I would consider it. I wasn't trying to flip it. I mean, yeah, the idea of camping on it for some of them, yeah, but a couple of them I haven't even been to. So I was stacking land for, yeah. So during that time, like probably like 6 years, just kind of, when I can get a piece of land, I get a piece of land, California, Oregon. I have family in Missouri. Was able to get some land in Missouri, old farm, top of the hill, Canchola Mountain, that me and my uncle bought together. Has been in the family for probably almost 100 years now. And then, of course, I followed the land geeks. But then, I just never really, I was more of like, okay, I'm just going to save the land just like as an investment. And I wanted to just kind of, build more purchasing power over time. And it was just a great way to save cash versus keeping it in the bank. And it worked out very well because then, of course, COVID happened, right? COVID, I had a good position in land. Everyone wanted to go RVing, wanted to go camping. Everyone was buying land during that time. We come full circle around here in the last about since early last year is when I decided to actually kick off my own land business, started TerraFlow Capital. I pretty much wrote over three of my pieces of land from my trust to my LLC. And that's what I was using to kind of build the initial capital. I sold one of the lands. I got another one in escrow now. So just using that as like the startup funding so we can, fund more deals, and maybe, try to find some other target properties and yeah, just kind of keep that capital moving. So the idea of TerraFlow Capital is the fact that, Terra is earth. We got to keep those land deals flowing and, thus the capital kind of keeps growing. And that was the whole idea of just kind of keeping the money in motion and keeping the land deals in motion, and not getting too emotional with some of this land that I get. Cause that's my problem is I want to keep every piece of land that I get because I love land and all that stuff. But I do see the reasoning behind being able to build cash flow from the land, whether it's selling them full cash for instant return or doing some owner finance deals, which I want to get some more of those under my belt. So we have a little consistent cash flow for the business, but also have ways to still get bigger wins in the future.
The land banking point, I think, is pretty interesting. I think a lot of people don't really think about saving in land. Um, but if people were to go get gold or silver, you might need to pay to store that in some way, or protect it. Can you give the listeners a sense of like what you're paying to hold on to those? Like, what are the property taxes for some of those
Yeah.
properties, just so people will get a flavor?
Yeah, and the property tax for the most part, even you would think for 20 acres, but I think I got the deal. I got it pretty cheap. And California's pretty chill with taxes because you only get charged like 2% increase based on what you paid for it. Whereas Texas, it's not as the same thing. Like you get charged based on what they think the what you could actually sell it for. So the taxes were pretty reasonable, like sub 350 a year. But when I look at the appreciation, at least for like the one lot that I sold, like the one I bought for 15, it was 20 acres. I got 15K, and I was able to sell that with the realtor within 60 days for 45. Right, so
Wow,
that was a pretty good come up right there, and that was holding it for. I held that one for probably less than 2 years. Um,
that's amazing.
so I think, yeah, I think no matter what, even if you're paying a little bit of taxes in it, I think as long as you buy it right and you're not overpaying for the land, the taxes should be nominal in regards to the appreciation you should be getting on the property. But I would be wary and be wary if, watch out for HOAs or large HOA fees because that will start eating into your, the profits over time. So I would try to stay away from those
Mhm.
if you can.
And do you have any plans to like build on any of those, like
Mm,
the one in Kern, like do you, or
Actually, as soon as I got the first 20 acres, what I did was I found a local shed company and I put a 10 by 12 Walden style shed that looked like a cabin. I had to do like the cabin outside, they had like special cabin siding and I put a green roof on it. And then I put a little same little 8 by 6 kind of like a outhouse. So it's a cute little tiny cabin outhouse. When you drive up to the top of the hill and you see it and you see it, you just see the cabin kind of nested and it's just like very picturesque. When you think of like tiny living and you see, you can kind of see it. It's like, man, that's pretty nice. Even though it's just like a shell inside, raw camping, dry camping. So of course you got to take your camping toilet. And but the great thing is I can shoot guns out there. I can just kind of lounge and be free. And again, it just feels like a whole different world when you're kind of out in nature. And the great thing about that property is 6 miles around the corner. We actually hiked it, me and my friend Sarah, the Pacific Crest Trail is connected, is right around the corner, about 6 miles on a back road, and it's like the intersection of the PCT. And so we've actually gone back there. If you go to the right, you go towards the desert, and if you go to the left, you go towards like the Sierra, forest area. So it's like a great little point for if you're like a backpacker hiker. I can go, in the forest, or I can go explore the desert in my backyard.
Mhm. I mean, if someone were interested in maybe getting some land, like what would you kind of steer them to or like towards? Like how should they go about identifying some land that they might want, maybe to either flip or to hold long term?
Yeah, if it was like me, my situation, and of course if you read Walden, Life in the Woods, or if you romanticize about, being in your cabin in the woods or being off grid, which I'm sure many people always dream about, and that dream's fixated in a lot of human beings. I think it's like almost like a calling, like the mountains are calling, the land is calling you back. And I think for anybody, like if you're living, most of the time they're probably living in some kind of major metro area, so being able to look for land within like a 50-mile radius of where you're at and trying to keep it within about probably no more than 3 or 4 hours. I mean, even that's a long ways, but yeah, the farther you go out, usually from like the main metros and more rural areas, you usually, Realtor was my best friend, Realtor.com or Zillow. I would, based on my like location, I would go 50 miles out. I would put, 20, as many acres as I could for the cost per acre. I would try to get the best deal I possibly could. Of course, depending on what kind of land you want, like is it going to be desert? Do you want it to be like, Pacific Northwest with trees? You'll probably pay a little premium there. And then you have to think about the lot itself. Does it have like HOA, any kind of restrictions? Are you allowed to camp on it? A lot of the land that I like to get is a little less restrictive, where I could camp on it for 7 to 30 days out of the year, and different things like that. But for the most part, if you're going pretty rural, you're not going to have people probably breathing down your neck to where if you just go camp out there or set up an RV, it's not going to be that big of a deal. But yeah, I would just think about the cost per acre. And maybe you don't even need a full acre. Maybe you just need a quarter acre to kind of build your little off-grid setup. And maybe you don't even need a structure from the beginning. I know when we first got the land, me and my daughter just set up camp. That first night, I still remember that first night was kind of creepy though, because this was kind of weird. The first night we actually spent the night on the land in the tent just to kind of pick where the cabin would, because they were going to bring the cabin the next day and we were going to, show them where to put it. We go to bed that night, and of course I'm packing out there too, of course, because I didn't know what to expect. But it's like probably like 2 in the morning, pitch black. You're out there, you just see the stars. We're in the tent. All of a sudden, I hear footsteps walking
Oh,
around the tents. Pretty big steps too. And I could probably a cow or something or whatever, but finally worked up the courage to kind of poke my head out and shine a light out there. And of course, when I do it, there's like nothing out there, right? And then the next morning, we go back to sleep. Everything's fine. We go to sleep. I don't know if there's some weird kind of drawing, like some kind of weird, like drawing in the sand at the top of the hill. I even have a picture of it. I'll have to send it to you, but it was like almost look. It, it almost seemed like maybe a snail was walking in a circle and maybe made it, but it just seemed like too. I don't know. It was just weird. It was so
huh.
weird. But we've never had any issues or anything up there. But it was just a weird first night because it's like footsteps around the tent. But of course, we have wild cows roaming around there. Like we can have cows roaming. We've even had wild horses hanging out on the property
Okay.
for a while. I guess somebody let them go, and they were just kind of being wild, and they thought my property was the best property, and they were just kind of feeding on the grass. And it's free range there. So if you don't have fences, the cows and horses can come do whatever they want. So of course, there's cow pies all over the place. But it's just that's the kind of environment that you expect. You see wild pigs running around, not wild pigs, but they're just kind of free range too. All kinds of critters are just kind of running around. But it's a good little area. I would definitely recommend it.
Well, sounds like a good endorsement from the horses on your
Mm.
land. Um, Okay, so I have to say when I meet with you and the land flipping group, some of your AI skills are just unbelievable to me. The amount you're experimenting in the AI space, and I know you started in SEO with Apartment SEO,
Mhm.
but can you talk through some of the cool things you're seeing in the AI space on the horizon?
Yeah, no, I've been going really deep down that rabbit hole. I think there is just so much potential for every industry, right? If you have domain knowledge, like whether it's in land investing, or SEO, or like my niche is like multifamily real estate. If you have good domain knowledge and you embrace AI, there's so much that can empower you to do different things. So obviously everyone's familiar with ChatGPT, but I think another one that would be I would recommend your listeners probably check out, which they may have not, is Claude. Claude is probably the number one coding AI coder builder. So if you have ideas you want to bring to life, it's never been easier to actually create some kind of prototype, and using Claude or even like a ChatGPT to build out apps, to build out different ideas you might have. And it's really empowering. Plus, maybe even taking your data from like it could be like analyzing leads, right? You could analyze the leads that come in, so it can qualify them, it can grade them. So many different things we can think about in regards to like embracing AI in general. But the other thing is too is how do we show up more in AI search, right? So now people are not just using Google, they're using GPT, Perplexity. And so people like us, when we have our land businesses or other people that have local businesses, now it's like, okay, how can we be a part of the conversation? Because now just ranking on Google isn't the only game in town. There's a lot of referral traffic coming from the GPTs, from the Perplexities. And so what we're trying to do is help our clients figure out the best way to do that. And a lot of that's through building your own brand, having mentions of your brand on a lot of third party platforms, doing a podcast, doing videos like this where your brand can get more reach, and exposure, and mentions is going to be huge. So we're really trying to put all that together, and there's different buckets of AI too, right? You have AI automation, you have AI coding, AI search, AI content creation. So also you have to kind of bucket the different types of AI and then figure out how you want to implement that either for your personal life or in business as a whole.
Mhm. I know you had mentioned some AI books or resources. If someone were totally in the dark, I mean, I know you mentioned Claude and some of these others, but if someone were wanting to like read something or listen to something, do you have any resources for them?
Yeah, I got the AEO blueprint. is for AI search. You know, how to become the answer that AI recommends is definitely like easy reading. I would recommend. And then if you're interested more in the, I have that book with me here. Oh yeah, this is a good one here. This is one I need to get into a little bit more. This one's called The Machine Layer: How to Stay Visible, How to Stay Visible and Trusted in the Age of AI Search. The Machine Layer,
Okay.
and that's a
Okay,
good. This
cool.
is probably a little bit more technical. But then also, I would recommend. I would think about vibe coding with AI, vibe coding, and doing just some basics. Base44.com, and that's base44.com, is a great, easy to use vibe coding platform. And if you can come up with any idea you can think of in your head and kind of scope it out with this platform, and you can build out something pretty cool, at least a basic MVP. And then you can even send the code to GitHub, which that's getting a little more technical, but really you don't even have to see the code anymore with platforms like Base 44. So I highly suggest your listeners get familiar with some type of vibe coding platform, whether it's Cloud Code or Base 44, and try to build something. Like literally, you have a conversation with it, like you do with ChatGPT, and it brings your ideas to life.
So all that sounds pretty cool on the creation side. I'm curious, have you used it all in terms of managing your wealth at all? Getting ideas
Ah,
or
so I have been doing something interesting because in my AI marketing class, I'm a member of Orange Labs, which is a AI marketing community, and I did Brittany Muller's actionable AI marketing course, which really helped light a fire and kind of empower me on what I could do and what I can build. So with Bitcoin and silver, I actually there's a within Python. Python's a programming language, and you can do a lot of cool things with like numbers and forecasting. And Meta has something called Profit. And it's like an open source algorithm where it can do like predictions. And so I was able to build like a quick little script in Google Colab for Bitcoin, for silver, to kind of help predict the price over the next 7 days, 30
oh,
days, and kind of like take into account, since I have domain knowledge of Bitcoin, the halving schedule, how many coins, Google Trends, search volume. I plugged all these different, data points into it to kind of give me the best forecast possible. Same thing with silver, kind of estimating, okay, these are the above stockpiles we have now. This is when they could be depleted. This is the demand for silver. This is like the supply coming out of the ground estimated, and plugging in. And again, my example of, if you have domain knowledge, like me, I love finance, I love silver and Bitcoin. So I know a lot of how the insides work. So if I understand that and now I know how to build AI products, I can plug in my domain knowledge with my AI product knowledge, put those together and build really rapid prototypes and things that help me make better financing and investment decisions in the future. Like I could build that for any stock, for any kind of asset. I just need some basic understanding of, of what it is and the story that needs to be kind of told.
amazing. Fascinating times we're living in. So as we're winding down, I like to ask every guest, what's the best and worst personal finance advice you've heard?
The best, let me see. So that's a tough one. So the best financial advice, probably the best financial advice I ever heard, and I can't remember exactly. It might have been a Kiyosaki thing, or might probably the Millionaire Mind, where focus on investing in your business, right? Because the more you can grow your business and your personal skills and learning, I think that's going to go farther than any Bitcoin or gold investment. Like me, really doubling down, not just staying on SEO. Like don't let your growth be stagnant in regards to what you can learn and know, because specialized knowledge is really a competitive advantage, right? So being an SEO, I've always had a little bit of a competitive advantage because it's like specialized knowledge. But in the world of like, with ChatGPT and things like coming out, it's like almost like some of the things were being automated for SEOs, right? So I had to, think of like, well, what's the next stage? Like, and that's where AI search is like the next stage for SEOs, knowing how to do SEO and AI search. All that's going to play a role. So me learning AI product development, that's helping me become even more strategic, more stronger SEO, to where I can actually build prototypes. I can send them to my AI engineers and team. I can actually bring my ideas to life rather than just kind of expressing my ideas to them. I could actually build something to show them, this is what I wanted to do. Now I want you guys to take it and put it like into like our actual product. And so just this specialized knowledge is helping me kind of catapult me even higher, to where I have more value for my company, for my businesses, to where it'll make a bigger impact for everybody.
Awesome.
And the worst
Any advice?
advice, probably the worst advice I ever had. Um, I think of the worst financial advice I've ever had. The one thing, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say words. I can't think of it, but I think like I always go back and forth on like we bought our house here in like Elsinore. We
Uh-huh.
bought it at the 2008 financial, like at the bottom of the market, like for like sub a little over 100, and it was crazy in California, right? And then today, like, it's like I always go back and forth. Okay, do I sit on it, or do we take it and buy something else in like a more rural part? Because sometimes I want to go to Northern California and like, buy something
Uh-huh.
cash and cash out and kind of build that up too. So I always go back and forth on like, do I stay in my home? And plus the taxes, like my taxes are so cheap here, I'm almost like I just paid off and then have like no, almost like a Warren Buffett, just stay in the same house and use that as a way to just, build more capital and just save and invest. And I think that's my biggest thing is just being able, the best and worst advice is try to, we have to keep our expenses low, right? Especially if you have kids and
Mhm.
things like that. It's easy to try to keep up with the Joneses. And I think that's probably one thing I've been good at, even with making a little more money, is that I'm not trying to impress anybody. Like when people, 2016 Tacoma, a couple older Toyotas, all paid off. My house isn't flashy. But again, I'm financially stable, stability wise, like, we would be good for a long time. And I think that's what matters, be having security for your family and making those wise decisions now. So this way your future self, can thank you for that.
Mhm. Awesome. Well, Martin, I think the listeners got a lot of value. Why don't you tell them where they can go reach out to you or find out about your services?
Yeah, cool. So I am on LinkedIn. So if you put in Martin Canchola, you can check me out there. We can connect. Also, if you want to talk land, terraflowcapital.com. And then if you want to talk internet marketing or AI, you can hit me up at apartmentseo.com. But either way, just find me, let's connect, and let's have a conversation. And thank you, Jack, for this interview. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks. And we'll have links to all those in the show notes. Thanks so much, Martin.
All right. Thank you. All right.